Hey, Raising Athletes podcast fans, Kirsten here, and I have to share my new favorite hydration secret with you. Corvive's Hydrate in pink lemonade. If you're looking for the ultimate hydration boost, this is it. Corvive's Hydrate is an NSF certified for sport, trusted by 4 Major League Baseball teams and 3 military bases. With 6 grams of pure organic cane sugar, it ensures you absorb all the electrolytes you need. And get this, it has 3 times the electrolytes and 4 times less sugar than those leading brands. Plus, it's developed using the World Health Organization's standards for oral rehydration solutions, making it the equivalent of a bag of IV fluids. Best of all, there are no artificial dyes or sweeteners. It's so perfect for the entire family. You can drink it any time of day, before, during, or after workouts or sports. So say goodbye to sugary juices and hello to superior hydration with Corvive's Hydrate in pink lemonade. Visit corvive.com. That's CORVIVE.com. And use promo code Kirsten. That's KIRSTEN for 30% off your order. Try it today and feel the difference.
Hello and welcome back to the Raising Athletes podcast. My name is Kirsten Jones. I'm a peak performance and sports parenting coach and the author of fairly recently published Raising Empowered Athletes, how we can support raising not only strong athletes, but extraordinary people. And that's exactly why Susie Walton and I started this podcast 5 years ago. We just passed the 100 episode mark, and we're forging ahead because there's still so much room to cover. We started a new series, which we call Talking to the Student Athlete, maybe 9 months ago. And my guest today is perfect because she's a recently graduated student athlete, and now she's a coach in the college realm. So I love that we're going to be able to talk about both her experience as an athlete herself and what that was like, and the mental health component, and how do we transition from 2 sports to one, and all of that. And how do we, now she's balancing it from the other side, looking at it with the coach's hat on. So welcome, Jul Thomson.
Thank you, Kirsten. I'm excited to be here and chat with you today.
So let's start with how we met. Full disclosure, your brother and my son were dancing in Memphis just a couple weeks ago. And it was so cool, right? Yeah. That first round NC2As, Colgate gets to play Baylor in the first round. What was your experience getting the opportunity to go watch your brother do that?
Well, first off, it was great. And it was so fun to meet you. Kirsten and I happened to have seats right beside each other at the first round of March Madness, even though my brother in Colgate has had the opportunity to go to the big dance a few years in a row. This was actually my first time getting to go watch, and it was just an amazing experience. It was so awesome to be there to support Sam and Parker and the rest of their teammates, and just as a former basketball player, taking in that environment and being a part of March. I mean, everyone lives for March Madness, so it was a great experience.
And do you think, like, from Sam's lens, I mean, we were laughing about it, right? Like, oh, ho, hum, March Madness, right? Like, they've gone, I think every year he's been there, right?
Yeah, every year. Yeah, the first year was COVID, so they still got to go, and I think the experience was a little different for them because of the COVID-19 protocols. But I think it was funny chatting with him because I was just so awestruck at this, and it was just very normal and regular for him and some of the seniors on the team. So I think me being there and maybe telling him how cool this was, reminding them about that, I don't think they take it for granted, but just having been in that position before, being reminded by someone who had never experienced it, how amazing and awesome it was helpful for him.
Yeah. I mean, we had people saying, well, are you going? I'm like, are you kidding? Of course I'm going. Like, this may never happen again. I mean, I hope it does. Wouldn't that be wonderful? But you can't assume that. So wonderful. Well, let's jump into your journey. And we chatted about this quite a bit, but I just found your story fascinating and on so many levels. So could you take us back to kind of how you started off as an athlete? What is your recollection of the importance that your parents put on sport or versus academics? You end up going to Dartmouth, so obviously you were a great student as well. Let's talk about your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So sports have been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. I don't really remember there being a conscious decision of you're doing sports or you're not. It just was kind of always something we did. I'm assuming like a lot of people that you chat with. So it started with like little kids soccer, swimming lessons, and then as I got taller and grew, my parents put me into basketball, as most tall young children do. However, after speaking with you, I wish I had played more volleyball growing up, but that's beside the point. So I think it was in third grade. I remember actually vividly trying out for our local club team, and I just played club basketball and school basketball all the way through my senior year of high school. As did my brothers. I played a few other high school sports, but it was mostly just focusing on basketball when I was serious enough to play AAU and travel club teams and stuff like that.
Okay, so I'm such a visual learner too, so let's talk context. So where did you grow up, and what was the environment like with AAU and all of that? At what point did you like have somebody go, oh, she's good?
Absolutely. So I grew up in Kitchener-Waterloo, which is a decent sized city, about an hour and a half west of Toronto. And it's actually a basketball haven. There's a ton of basketball players that come out of Kitchener-Waterloo. Jamal Murray's probably a name that you recognize. Went to high school just down the street from me. And I was really lucky growing up in a program that had really strong women's basketball. And coming a few years after, some girls that had gone to play Division I in America and who would come home for the summers and train. Girls like Michelle Huden and Alex Klein, they played at Missouri and Bryant. They would come home and kind of mentor the younger female athletes in our area. So I was really lucky to grow up in a place that had a really awesome women's basketball community and program. When I started high school, a new league started in Ontario, the province that I'm from, called the Jul League, which is funny because that's also my name, but it stood for the Junior Elite League, and practically club teams from around the province would play each other 2 games every weekend. And it was a way for girls to play at a really high level. A lot of people I played with and played against landed up playing Division I. So it was just a great place to play basketball. And from there we had an AAU team, and we would travel south starting, I think, in summer after the 9th grade to play games for AAU and kind of get that American exposure.
Oh, sorry. Was it always the goal to play in the US, or was there ever like, no, I'd like to play in Canada?
I think that when I realized maybe at the end of 9th grade, beginning of 10th grade, that I had the opportunity to play Division I was all about it. I was very adventurous growing up, and I always wanted to go far away for school and try something new. And I was really blessed with some great opportunities for college, and was able to go explore Division I and try something else out. There's a ton of great basketball programs and schools in Canada that would have been also a great fit, I think. But I wanted to do something different, and it worked out for me in that sense.
What do you remember your parents' message? Like I live in Los Angeles, and I have parents that, well, my child can go within 2 hours of home. I always find that interesting, and I get no judgment, but just, I mean, I was raised at, my parents' rule was you had to go at least 500 miles away because they wanted you to have a different experience and not come home with your dry cleaning or laundry and not be reliant upon them. Do you remember kind of, your brother obviously also went south. So like what were the messaging that you remember your parents saying to you?
Yeah, I think pretty early on in the recruiting process, I think they had 2 messages for me. The first message was they want me to go where I want. They did not want to influence my decision-making process at all. So whether that was 2 hours away or 10 hours away, they didn't want their opinions to be a factor in my decision. Obviously, I value what they thought at the time, but they wanted to let me come to that decision on myself. And the second thing that they really emphasized was the importance of academics. And I had always loved school. I was definitely pretty nerdy growing up and in high school. When I had the opportunity to attend a high-level academic school, that was probably one of the times we sat down and they said, we're not going to tell you what to do, but if you have an opportunity to go to a certain level academic school, we would probably recommend that you take that opportunity if it's presented to you.
So let's talk about your recruiting journey. And one thing that I always say is there are no two journeys that are alike. And I think particularly now when there's so much around social media and the hype, and, I'm guessing you're probably on a team where other girls are getting recruited and she already has offers and I don't. And, how do you keep the FOMO out? So maybe talk about how did it happen? At what age did you start to get recruited? And then when did Dartmouth become one of your top choices, and how did you select them?
Absolutely. So I graduated high school in 2016, and I think that my years of recruiting and playing high school sports was kind of right before social media became a thing in the recruiting world. I have very vivid memories of my dad and I burning my highlights onto CDs and mailing them to schools. And I think honestly, that was probably one of the last classes where that was a thing. That seems so antiquated now to say that's how we did it. But like I mentioned before, my program that I played basketball in, everyone was really supportive, and I played with some great players who were also getting looks from Division I schools. So there was never any issues or jealousy with that type. We were very open and supportive. And I remember us, carpooling to basketball camps together, and whose parents would drive one weekend or whose would drive the next. So I would say there was never really any issues on that front between my teammates and I. And my coaches were very supportive of helping me achieve my goals of playing at the next level. So I only have good things to say about that. I think I started talking to a few Ivy League schools end of my sophomore year, beginning of my junior year. And I think it was spring break of my junior year that my mom and I took a big road trip on the East Coast to take some unofficial visits. And it's funny, I actually remember visiting Dartmouth. And for those of you listening that are familiar with the school, it's in New Hampshire. And we visited in March, which is not the best time to visit a campus in New Hampshire. And I remember getting in the car after and saying to my mom, I don't think this is the place for me. It is cold. It is in the middle of nowhere. I think we also happened to visit on Dartmouth spring break, so no one was around. And I kind of left that unofficial being like, I don't love it, but I know this is a really great school and could be a really great place for me. So it was funny because over the next year, over the remaining part of my junior year and into that summer, just doing my research and getting to know more about the school and the staff and the academic opportunities, I totally fell in love with it. So it was kind of like a 180 in that sense of my initial impression of the campus and the school to where I landed, committing just before my senior year to play basketball there.
I love so many things about what you said because it reiterates a lot of the points I try to make, which one is show up. Yeah. And so even if you think your kid isn't going to like it, it's not about finding the perfect fit right out of the gate. It's about, say, set up the buffet, right? Yeah. Let's look at whatever, 8 to 10 to 12 to 15 options so that you can see what's out there. And the other part that's so perfect and spot on is it does matter. I mean, even my daughter right now is a senior in high school. We live in Los Angeles. It is 72 and sunny most of the time. We went to go visit a school in Los Angeles just a couple of weeks ago, and she's like, I don't know, it's not very sunny. And I'm like, really? That's your feedback? You right. live here, but it's amazing how that affects your impression over everything. And then if you have an empty campus too, so that's great feedback. And sometimes that's the time that you get to go, but make sure you take that into account when you're looking at all the pieces. And if there's nobody on campus, yeah, it's going to look like a quiet ghost town, and you probably can't picture yourself there versus the day, a summer day where that lawn in front of the, outside of the main campus. I remember all these kids are out there, everybody's, playing kickball or whatever, we're sitting on, playing music and dancing, and you're like, oh, I can picture myself here, right? This is a fun place to be.
Absolutely. And I really feel for student athletes and just students, even if they aren't playing sports at the next level, who had to make those college decisions during COVID and weren't able to visit the schools that they were accepted to or the schools that they wanted to commit to. So being physically boots on the ground, I think, is such an important aspect of choosing a college, whether you're playing sports or not, I think you really need to go and experience the community before you can make that decision, because it's a huge decision. Unless you're thinking about maybe transferring, you're going to be there for at least 4 years. So that's definitely a recommendation and advice I have to anyone who's choosing a school.
So it was basketball that recruited you, is that right? The basketball program?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then when did track and field come onto your radar? Was it not till you were after there, or did you start talking to them as well in the process?
Yeah, so I never played track, or I never competed in track, played track during high school. I was completely unfamiliar with the sport. So I had all intention of going to college and playing basketball for all 4 years. My freshman year, unfortunately, I had some pretty serious health issues that also kind of took a toll on my mental health. I realized I wasn't loving the game like I always had, and decided to take a step back from that. I stepped away from the team at the end of my freshman year. Took a couple months just to figure out what I wanted to do, whether it was transferring somewhere else to play basketball, staying at Dartmouth and just being a student and finishing my degree there. I decided that I wanted to stay at Dartmouth, even if I wasn't going to play basketball, and landed up meeting some other student athletes on the track team, and they encouraged me to come try out, and the rest was history. I landed up competing for 3 years, 2 years with COVID, on the track team at Dartmouth.
And you don't have to go into details if you don't feel comfortable, but just in general, because this comes up a lot, right? We make decisions, we think we're all in, and for all intents and purposes, we are. And then, could it be, personally what we're going through, or what the fit is with the coach or with the girls or with the school. Like, a lot of things happen. And again, we're growing and evolving. And I think it's just important to go into it with your eyes wide open that, yes, you made the decision based on this one thing, but you pivoted, and that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think college sports is a huge adjustment. And in hindsight, I was not prepared for the mental aspect of that. I mean, at the time, you're 17, 18 years old. I don't know if you're aware of how different it will be from high school. I think myself and a lot of people included go from playing 40 minutes a game in high school and winning all their games. And I came into a team where I was a freshman, I was sitting on the bench, I wasn't seeing court time at all. I was making the adjustment of being an Ivy League student, which was incredibly tough adjustment on the classroom side of things, along with traveling every weekend. The Ivy League schedule, you play back to back Friday, Saturday. So you travel after the Friday game to the next location Saturday morning, and then you play, and then you're back on the bus going to campus. So all of that was taking a toll on me, coupled with the fact that I was going through some pretty severe medical issues. I was not in a good place. And I said, I think the issue is basketball, which was tough because that had never been a negative thing in my life before. And unfortunately, it was the perfect storm that it wasn't doing any good for me mentally. And I removed myself from that. And in hindsight, it was probably the best decision I ever made, other than choosing to go to Dartmouth in the first place. So
what a brave choice, though, because being a competitor, I would imagine your MO is like, no, just, at least I always think of suck it up, buttercup, like push through. And for you to be that in touch with yourself, to know this was what I needed to do. And again, I'm sure had your parents' support to do it, and then be able to have the courage to do it, that's really impressive at 18, 19 years old.
Yeah, it was definitely tough. And we had some hard decisions, and they wanted to make sure that I was sure. I had obviously dedicated so many hours to this game my whole life. And so had they, frankly, driving me and traveling with me and committing so much time and money, that I think it was hard for all three of us at one point. And we had some tough conversations. But I think once they realized how much better I was doing after I had stepped away from the team, they were so incredibly happy and supportive of my decision also.
And then for you to be able to pivot at 18 years old to a sport you'd never done before speaks to your athleticism and obviously your ability. And what I say a lot to parents is like, coaches are looking for, like, they can see how you move. They can see like, oh, a lot of the skills that you use with the basketball, it's throwing a shot put, it's getting under the ball, it's using your legs, it's using your core. I can teach her how to throw the shot put or throw the discus. I can't get that physicality out of everybody, right? So in a way, maybe basketball prepared you for the pivot?
Absolutely. And I think actually above all, it speaks to the patience of the Dartmouth track coaching staff. They took a huge gamble on me, and I was lucky to have one of the most patient men I've ever met as my coach, Coach Farino at Dartmouth. So yes, everything you said is true. And when I first approached him about maybe walking on to the team, he sat down with me and he said that he had coached a ton of girls who had played basketball, whether it was at the high school level or dual sports in college. And just the footwork and the pivoting that come from the game really transfer over to throwing. And I ended up throwing shot put, discus, hammer, and weight for Coach Farino at Dartmouth. And yeah, he was just the best. It was a big adjustment for me going from a team sport my whole life to shifting into an individual sport that's also a team sport. And he was just had the most patience, and I am forever grateful for him and our head coach for giving me that opportunity.
So now in your mid to late 20s, what advice do you have for your 19-year-old self as you were making that pivot?
Yeah, really good question. I think first and foremost, I'm proud of myself for trying something completely new, but my advice to myself and to anyone would be, don't be afraid to fail and to be the worst. It was really tough for the first couple years of being on a track team. I would get last at the meets. I would not throw far, and you have to be okay with not being the best, especially coming from a sport where I had seen success. Shifting into a sport that I knew nothing about is definitely tricky, and then not winning anything is also tough. But I would say, like, persevere through the failures, and your hard work will eventually pay off.
And do you remember what your talk track was? Like, what were you saying to yourself, knowing you weren't going to be good to begin with because you were brand new, but still there's an ego there, right? Around, I'm an athlete, right? I should be able to pick this up. Like, this shouldn't be that hard. Do you remember kind of how you approached it?
I think I'm really lucky because I was surrounded with really great teammates on the track team. I came in, even though I was a sophomore at that point, the freshman class that came in, they became my best friends. We ended up living together for the rest of college, and the upperclassmen on that team were so encouraging and supportive that I think I wasn't even in my own head for most of the time, because it was just very positive, uplifting conversations at practice, at meets. And for you, if you're unfamiliar with throwing as a sport, and for anyone listening, it is an incredibly supportive community. So you go to these track meets, and this is where it was very different from basketball for me. We would go to the Ivy League championship for track, and you have people from all the schools cheering you on when you throw and when you compete. And that was such a cool environment to be a part of. And something that I had never really experienced before in basketball, where you do not talk to the people that you're competing against. So going into this individual sport where everyone, it seemed, in the league and everyone around the East Coast that we would compete with really wanted to see and support each other to do well and throw far, it was really somewhat of an easy mental transition into this new sport.
That's amazing to have a community supporting you, and even from other teams, right? Like, I love that concept, because you're right, in basketball, and what we see so much with youth sports is not only people not supporting you, they're cheering against you, right?
Yeah.
And that's hard on 10, 11, 12-year-olds, right? Like, why is that person cheering when I missed my free throw? Like, that's cannot feel good.
No, not at all. So I was honestly completely taken aback when I started going to these meets, and people were so supportive and inclusive. And I remember my parents coming to one of my first indoor Ivy League championships, and they were blown away by just this community and how supportive people were and how encouraging people on other teams were. And I was really lucky to be a part of that as a student athlete.
Amazing. Okay, so Jul, take us forward from there. So you graduate in 4 years, is that right?
Yeah, so I graduated in spring of 2020. Unfortunately, COVID kind of shut everything down March of my senior year. So we all got sent home at what we thought was going to be an extended spring break, and we ended up just being home through the summer. But because of COVID and the Ivy League canceling sports, I landed up with some extra eligibility for track and field, which that was kind of the silver lining of this horrible world event that happened, I think, for a lot of college student athletes. Put my name into the transfer portal and was able to talk to some schools about coming as a grad transfer and competing on their track team. So I landed up doing a 2-year master's degree at Villanova, where I was able to compete for the Wildcats for 2 years and graduated then from Villanova in spring of 2022.
So did you consider playing at Dart or staying on at Dartmouth, or they didn't offer what you were interested in studying for your master's? Or
Yeah, super interesting. So the year that I graduated, which was the first year of COVID, the Ivy League had a league-wide rule that did not allow grad student athletes. It turns out that the year after I left, because of COVID still canceling sports, they made an amendment to that rule where if you had your season canceled by COVID and you wanted to stay on at your Ivy League school, you were allowed to stay on as a graduate student athlete. So a lot of people in the class after me ended up staying after they graduated to do their final year of eligibility at Dartmouth or any other Ivy League school. But unfortunately for me, that rule still stood. Yeah, when I was graduating. So there was that. And then I think in a sense, I was ready to move on to a new place. I love Dartmouth and I love my teammates and my coaches, but it's a very small town. It's very isolated and rural. And I was ready for just a change of scenery, I think. So it worked out for me to explore other options.
So let's talk about Villanova. I mean, a city school and much different environment. And now you're a grad student. Talk us through that experience and what did you learn about yourself as an athlete, but also like what was important to you?
Absolutely. So I would say being a graduate student athlete was completely different than being an undergraduate student athlete. The way my program at Villanova was structured, I did my MBA there. We only had night classes 3 times a week. So there was all of a sudden so much more free time for training, for life than I had being an undergraduate athlete who goes to class for most of the day, then to practice, and then does homework and whatnot. So my schedule was kind of flipped, and that was an adjustment. My first year at Villanova, our classes were still completely remote because of COVID. So was moved to the Philadelphia suburbs and was just training and competing on the track team and then doing online school for my first year. And then going into my second year, everything was pretty much back to normal. So had more of a normal graduate school academic experience in the classroom. So yeah, it was different time management, but I loved my time at Villanova. We had a great team. We ended up winning the Big East Championship my first year there. Lots of grad transfers on the track team, I think in part due to COVID. So it was nice to be around teammates and other athletes who were in the same phase of life as me and not just be stuck with all freshmen or whatnot, even though I love all of my teammates. It was great to have a really strong community there of student athletes.
And so now you had this base because they invested in you at Dartmouth. Did that pay off at Villanova for you athletically?
Yeah, absolutely. So going into the transfer portal at Dartmouth, I didn't have great marks or distances in my events, but I got really lucky in that my Dartmouth coach actually grew up very close to the throws coach at Villanova, and they had known each other. So it was kind of through a personal connection that I got in touch with the coaching staff at Villanova. And then a girl from my high school in Canada who was a few years ahead of me, but had been a close family friend. She had run at Villanova under the same head coach that I had at Villanova. So it was kind of a bunch of personal connections that led me there. I was probably not qualified athletically to compete for that team or in the Big East, but I was lucky that some people bought into me and saw some potential that I had, and just having more time to train. And track and throwing is interesting. I think a lot of people tend to get better the longer they compete, and the older they get, the more their bodies develop. So a lot of the professional throwers you see are in their late 20s or early 30s. So I think just coming into my body more as a young woman, a lot of things lined up, and it was a really great time. And it was fun to see some success finally in the ring and on the track after having maybe not been super successful early on in my track career.
Yeah, I love that, because it's true. I think the journey, we kind of look at it as at 22, it's all going to be over. But as athletes, what you find, like with runners, some of the best runners and track and field athletes are in late 20s, early 30s, mid 30s, right? And they're really just hitting their stride if they're not burned out, they're not overcome with injuries. They're, like they still have love for what they're doing. Like that's the part that we have to really manage to make sure that you can, if that's what you want to do, that your body will hold out too, right?
Absolutely. And I think just the mental aspect, touching on something you just said, I did not feel burnout at all, because this was a sport I had just started doing when I was 19. So this was just my fourth year even doing this. So I think mentally that helped me be more successful physically, because I just loved what I was doing. Practice was the highlight of my day, and it still is now as a volunteer coach. But I think I was lucky in that sense. A lot of athletes, like you said, by the time, especially their fifth year and I was a sixth year, they are done, or they're mentally checked out and ready for the new adventure, which is fine. But I was not there yet. So I think that also really helped me in that season of my life.
And I get that a lot. I mean, I coach little 9 and 10-year-old girls, and parents come to me, "Oh, I'm so sorry." I'm like, "What?" "Well, we haven't started volleyball yet. I know we're behind." Right? And my heart honestly breaks when I hear that the pressure socially that you need to have started at 9 or 10 because Tiger Woods started putting at 2, then that's going to dictate. And yes, they're going to have more skills. And I, like you, I grew up in Montana where we played basketball year round and skied and did outdoor sports, and volleyball didn't become a sanctioned sport till I was in high school. And so you can only imagine what the level of play was. But like you, when I got to San Diego State out of high school, I was like chipper and like, woohoo, and let's do this. And my teammates were tired. Like they had been playing club and high school year round for, they had been, and this was obviously a long time ago. This was 30 years ago. I think it's gotten even much worse in the last 10, where these kids are feeling, again, parents are feeling the pressure to pick something by, maybe 9 or 10, versus let's let them experiment and explore. And then as they, decide what's right for them. Actually, I heard an interview with Michael Phelps yesterday, and he said he played everything until 12. And then at 12 was when somebody said, "You have the potential to be really good, but you are going to have to give up other things." And he goes, that's when, and that's what I say, usually around 12 or 13, if that's their passion, then fine. But if you can extend it into high school, 14, 15, the best athletes we know were multi-sport athletes growing up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I knew nothing about track and field, and especially not about throwing, because I feel like when you think track and field, you think running and jumping. But I knew nothing about the sport growing up. And I think seriously, to be successful at the collegiate level, if you have some sort of athleticism, you do not need to start doing it seriously until your junior or senior year of high school. It is such a great sport, but it builds on so many other skills you can get from playing basketball, volleyball, especially football. The footwork and the lifting, those are all things that transfer over really, really easily. And some of the best throwers that I competed with were dual sport athletes in college that just did track in the off season to train, football players, basketball players. So I agree. I think keeping all the doors open is paramount, and also allowing children to explore sports that are not mainstream. I think about track as a great sport to do in college, just a great atmosphere, really supportive community. I know a lot of friends who rode crew, and that's another maybe not mainstream sport, depending on where you're from in the world. And I think these are really great sports to explore at the collegiate level that young kids might not know about.
And so to get in the door, that requires a good GPA. It requires being a good student. And that's the other thing that I think we've flipped on its head a lot, is this idea that, oh, I'm just going to get recruited. Well, you know, again, getting into a Dartmouth or getting into a Villanova is hard these days. We're not, you know, like there's no, you know, all these schools are hard to get into anymore. But having that and, you know, athleticism combined with, you know, something that you're passionate about gives you the platform potentially to navigate as you did, which is really cool. So let's fast forward to where you are now, and you've kind of crossed over to the other side, right? And you're now coaching.
Yeah. So after graduating from my master's program in the spring of 2022, I started a PhD program that fall at George Mason University down in Virginia. So I'm doing my PhD in political science right now. And I am also a volunteer coach with the track team at George Mason. So I assist the head throws coach with coaching both the female and male athletes on our team. And it's been great. I will say the first year after finishing competing at Villanova was a huge adjustment, not being a stereotypical college athlete anymore. Obviously, we're all athletes and we all will always be athletes, but not being a collegiate athlete anymore. That was a big adjustment for me, and was struggling with that. All of a sudden, I had so much extra time. I was missing my teammates. I was missing that competitive environment. And I was actually, through a conversation with my Villanova coach, he said, I think you should reach out to the staff at George Mason and see if you can volunteer there, at least go to practice once or twice a week. Keep your foot in the door with sports because it's something that you love. So I ended up reaching out to the throws coach here at Mason. And she's wonderful. Michelle, she was a great discus thrower, collegiate discus thrower and post-grad discus thrower. And she welcomed me with open arms. And it's just been a wonderful experience being able to be a student coach now, I guess, in a sense.
I love that, because as your life is pivoting, yes, you're still, you know, chasing your PhD now, but I remember coming out of college and being like, okay, now what do I do?
What?
For the first time ever, I'm not being recruited. It's up, you know, like you're always like going to play on a team, whether it was softball or whatever, not even just like that's part of your DNA. And I know a lot of athletes really struggle with identity once they leave their sport, right?
It's huge. And I was one of those people. I was not having a good time when I was done throwing. And I think throwing is tough, right? There's no pickup throwing leagues, or it's not really something that you can go do it for fun, but not in the sense where you have a built-in community of people playing pickup basketball at the Y or something. It's not like that. So I went from doing this sport 20 plus hours a week to not having any of that anymore. And that was really tough. And I think it was less for me, not that I didn't know who I was. It wasn't this sort of identity crisis, but it was more, I just really missed the sport. And that's when, through conversation with people that are important to me, they said, hey, like, you should go try coaching. You still get to be involved in the sport. And that proved to just be a great piece of advice they had for me.
So what do you see as your role being a volunteer coach? Like, you know, having now just been a few years out of it, is it defined for you? Do you get to define it? How does that work for those who may be listening, who are college athletes, who are thinking about that?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, just like being an athlete, being a coach, I think is still about finding a coaching staff that you mesh with and you fit well with. So I'm lucky that there's a ton of schools here in the DC area, and I have a couple friends that are volunteer coaching at other schools. And it just worked out that I kind of hit it off with the staff at the school that I go to. So I think first and foremost, still having some sort of chemistry and working relationship with that coaching unit, because not being there every day, because I have classes still, I have my research job that I do. It's important to be on the same page and communicate. So finding a staff that will welcome you with open arms, even if you're not there 40 plus hours a week, I think is the first thing. And then second off, just being very clear with your boundaries, especially if you have another job or you're in school. So you can't sacrifice getting those tasks done to do this, even though there are some days where I say, I would much rather be at practice than going to class right now. But yeah, it's been great. Michelle and I, who's the coach here at Mason, we sat down at the beginning of the year and kind of outlined what I would be doing. So for us, that's 1, maybe 2 practices a week. And then once the outdoor season hit, I would be traveling to meets with the team or taking kids to meets on my own. I was mainly a discus thrower, so I'm most comfortable coaching discus, which is an outdoor event. So my responsibilities and my coaching things have kind of picked up now that we're in the outdoor season for track. But it's been great. It's really interesting to learn things on this side of it, seeing the logistics that go into having a team or practice or traveling for meets, all of those things that you're really not exposed to as a student athlete and you even take for granted as a student athlete. Seeing all of that has been great. And then obviously just learning from the staff here more about track and field and expanding my knowledge, especially as someone who didn't do every throwing event that seriously, learning the technicalities more of those events. It's just been a huge learning curve. I feel like every time I go to practice, I learn just as much or more than our athletes are.
And you're coaching both men and women, right?
Yeah, so we have, it's a co-ed team at George Mason. Some schools will just have women's track or just men's track, but we're lucky that we have both men and women's track here at Mason. So, yep, our throwers, we have 3 female throwers and 5 male throwers. So we have 8 people, which is a pretty small group. But when you're coaching 4 to 5 throwing events, our hands are full, I'd say, on a day-to-day basis.
So to put you on the spot, I know you have brothers, so it's not totally foreign to you, but from a motivational standpoint and a feedback standpoint, are there things that stand out about what types of information or how much communication women versus men like to receive and how they like to receive it?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I think also having been on co-ed teams at Dartmouth and Villanova, I had heard this from my coaches. Some people coach men and women differently, and it's not sexist. It's not anything like that. It's just that you have to handle people differently, and gender seems to be an indicator of that, especially at the collegiate level. So I had always heard that, but didn't really take it to heart because I was an athlete at that point. But now as a coach, it's interesting to see the way that student athletes receive information, the way they process information, and just their outlook on sports and on practice. I would say it's different. It's different between every single person.
Could you give any examples? Like anything come to mind about?
Yeah, this is a huge generalization, but I'd say like in our team now, we have some of our girls are very calm and they can take and receive information, and they're very calm, especially in competition. It's easy for them to take that. Whereas some of the men get really worked up and they're really amped up, and that limits the amount you maybe tell them in the heat of the moment. So that's just a small example. And I'm sure the longer I stay in coaching, I'll pick up on more of these nuances, but it's been interesting. And I also think it's great having been an athlete on a co-ed team. I think the way that you push men and women push each other in the weight room and at practice, I think that was one of the reasons why I had success as an athlete. I was around my male teammates who were lifting so heavy and were so strong and so fast. And that really encouraged me to get better and to work hard. So I think there's a lot of pros of having co-ed sports at the collegiate level.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think so too. And I think it encourages you to think differently. And then also, like, I have 2 boys and a girl, and you're the same, right? Where like my daughter, I think she processes things differently because her brothers just wouldn't tolerate her like having a meltdown. They would just ignore her when, and not that she's not that personality much really anyway, but we do get formed by those who are around us. And so you can take some of like, oh, this is what the men do really well. And I would hope that it also goes the other way, where men see, oh, wow, the benefit of me working out next to Jul, who actually thinks about what she's going to go do. Maybe I'm going to, again, approach my workout a little differently too. So that's a really cool balance to get to have being on a track team.
I think it's awesome. And I would say that it was a highlight. I think it's a great piece of being on a track team, that co-ed aspect of it.
So you're kind of now out of it, but now you're coaching it. And, just in the last, 18 to 24 months now, NIL and transfer portal and all of that is blowing up. I think I heard the basketball portal right now is at 2,000 guys, right? Or maybe it's guys and girls.
Crazy.
It's a lot, right? What are you seeing, or do you have any, again, not data, but just in general, is that happening in track and field too? Or do you hear much about that?
Yeah, it's the NIL stuff, which happened right after I graduated from my master's program and being a grad transfer. It's just completely blown up. And I think anyone who knows anything about college athletics sees it on almost a daily basis, NIL deals or transferring for money and whatnot. And one of my close friends actually works in the NIL sphere. So I hear a lot from her about what's happening and what's new and on the scene. But it's interesting. I think operating in this mid-major level in Division I sports, being an athlete at an Ivy League school and then at Villanova, it's not a Power 5 school, but it has high-level athletics. And now at Mason, I think we don't see as much NIL deals happening with student athletes at this level versus the Power 5 schools, and especially basketball and football. I think those are the big sports. It may be less so in track and field and at this level that I'm at. But it's just so interesting. And I think it's changing the landscape of college athletics. I don't know if it's for the better or for the worse, but it's very interesting because I think when I was in high school and this is still my view now as I'm coaching and moving into helping recruit kids, to me, this is still an academic decision. And your college decision is still, I remember being told when I visited Dartmouth, this is your 40-year decision, not your 4-year decision, right? Mm-hmm. So picking a place that's going to prepare you for life after sports is, to me, the purpose of college athletics and the reason why I coach. What can these kids learn that they can take into the next chapter of life? And I think NIL is completely changing that. I think it's great that student athletes are leveraging, their skills and their personalities to make money and better their lives for a lot of them. But I think for me personally, it's still an academic, it's still a school decision that if I could do it again, I think I would still make that decision not based on the money, not based on NIL, but based more on what will prepare me for life after sport.
Yeah, I'll finish where we started, which was being in Memphis and Colgate, which the Patriot League says the same thing. They're like, we don't have an NIL deal. Our deal is to help you graduate and help you, hopefully through our network, you will then find your next step, whether it's a career path or at least a job in the industry you think you want to be in. And then sitting in Memphis playing against a Baylor, who there were more people on their bench than there were in the Colgate crowd, right?
Yeah.
It was just so obvious to us. We talked about, right? Like seeing, there were at least 20 people wearing some kind of, coaching jersey of some sort. Like everything screamed, this is not about the 40-year plan. This is transactional. I'm not judging it. I'm just making a statement about knowing if you're in that front end of it and looking at what you want to get out of it, then make sure you're looking at it through that lens. And Parker, my younger one, did go through that where he had a couple schools that were very honest. And they said, I don't know if you're going to play. If you do get here, everybody thinks they're one and done. So just so you know, you're going to have different teammates every year because even if they aren't here for, aren't going to the NBA, they're going to probably be in the portal because they weren't getting enough playing time. And it's become so me-centric. In fact, today's article, the USA Today, that somebody just forwarded me was that the coach isn't going to recruit you because he said one of the red flags for when I recruit a kid is when the parents ask for courtside seats. That's their highest value, is in addition to giving my kid a full ride, and I would like a starting position, and he's going to be either a 2 or a 3, we would like to, I'm going to get courtside seats, right? So when we put this whole equation about what's in it for me and how is my kid going to benefit versus your approach, which was, how am I going to grow and develop and learn for the next, that was exactly what we said. It's not a 4-year deal, it's a 40-year deal. And what are the tools that I'm going to learn? And maybe I'm not going to win a title. Maybe my name isn't going to be hung in the banners, in the rafters, but I'm going to learn about who I am. I'm going to maybe have to pivot. It's not always going to go perfectly, but now the tool set that you have 6 years, 8 years later, to get out into the world, and again, not for it to go perfectly, but for you to say, oh, that was interesting. Here's what I really excites me, and that you're taking time to now go give back in volunteer coaching is amazing, right? And helping that next generation of them being on the front end and figuring it out.
Absolutely. We had a meet this past weekend, and we had a really great growth moment and learning opportunity when we had kind of a miscommunication among our athletes about the preparation for the meet. And on the van ride home, we had a really great conversation about, hey, this is not about you being prepared so you can throw far. That would be great if that's what comes of this, but showing that you know how to prepare for this athletic event shows me that we're learning skills to help us prepare for life when we graduate in May or next year or the year after. And I think that having that conversation with them and sitting down and saying, hey, these habits that we form, good or bad, are indicative of what we will carry on throughout our life when we can no longer lace up our shoes and go throw the discus or the shot put. And that's why I love still being involved in sports. And I hope, if anything, that's what the kids and the student athletes, they're not kids, that I get to work with can get out of their collegiate experience.
I think about right after we lost, we were in the lobby of the hotel, and the team was getting ready to load the bus, and we ran into Coach Langle, the head coach, and he smiled and said, it was a great run. We had a lot of fun. Yes, I wish we would have won, but wow, how we grew as a team this season and the things that we learned. And yeah, Parker knows he'll never leave the dirty uniform bag behind.
Right.
And again, you think, what does that matter? But that is exactly what you're talking about, are the life lessons that, again, should he decide to become a parent or he wants to be a coach, he probably will remember that more than, the best game or whatever that he had. It'll be about those opportunities where it didn't go the way he hoped off the court, even that helped him figure out, oh, this is important to me. This is an important part about being a teammate and being, part of this community. And, next year I'm going to do better.
Exactly. And that's all we can hope. And that's what I hope for my brothers who are now collegiate athletes and for my friends who are still athletes and for the student athletes. It doesn't matter if you win. It doesn't matter if you play, frankly, because even now, 2 years out, I barely remember how far I threw. And it's irrelevant now. And no one, frankly, cares that much. But it's how that prepared me for being a grad student and giving back to the sport that is probably the best thing that I took away from my experience as an athlete.
Jul, you're so well spoken, not surprisingly at all, but thank you so much. I want to let you go, but we got to ask you one last question that we ask everybody on the podcast. How would you finish this statement? And it can be a word, it can be a phrase, you can talk for a week if you want, but the best athletes I know do this. How would you finish that statement?
The best athletes that I know, not to reiterate what I just said, but the best athletes that I know are prepared physically, mentally, technically. Even if they are not going to win, they know what to expect. And preparation, I think, brings so much success in sport and in life. So the best athletes that I know and have been teammates with have always been prepared in all aspects of life.
I love that answer. Again, not to I don't even fangirl over him, but the fact Michael Phelps said exactly that. He said, I always looked at all three options, it going exactly the way I wanted, it maybe not going perfect, and then it really going poorly. And when my goggles fell off, I knew exactly how many strokes I needed to get to the wall. Had I not visualized it not going well, I would not have been prepared. And that was the difference between me winning a medal and me not medaling at all, basically. And I just pulled my head up and said, oh, my goggles broke. So yes, 100%. And that's what this whole journey is about. How am I going to be prepared after the ball stops bouncing, or in your case, the disc stops flying?
Yeah, exactly. I'll just say this to wrap up. My coach at Villanova, I remember one of my first meets with him. I said, I'm really nervous for Saturday. Like, this is my first meet with you, with this team. And he said, you won't be nervous if you're prepared. And that always stuck with me. And I carry that into my academic work. And I tell that to my athletes now. You're not going to be nervous for your test if you study and you prepare for it properly. So yeah, preparation is probably one of the things that I will write home about forever. So
wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. Is there somewhere people can find you or follow you or see what's going on with what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on Twitter at Jul Thomson, and I'm also on LinkedIn, mostly my academic stuff, but I share a little bit about track, and I can also provide my email, no problem, if anyone wants to chat.
Oh, well, this has been super insightful, and I loved hearing all of your journey and your wisdom, and just it's beautiful to see. And what I love is that you're continuing to perform at such a high level while taking time to reach back and give to those that are coming up behind you. And I'm sure they are loving having your wisdom to coach them and to learn from you. So thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
So parents, athletes, coaches, anyone that's listening, students, please like and share and follow. When we know better, we do better. We're all trying to get better at doing what we're excited about. And so let's do this.
Let's do it.
Hey, Raising Athletes podcast fans, Kirsten here. And I have to share my new favorite hydration secret with you. Corvives Hydrate in pink lemonade. If you're looking for the ultimate hydration boost, this is it. Corvives Hydrate is an NSF certified for sport, trusted by 4 Major League Baseball teams and 3 military bases. With 6 grams of pure organic cane sugar, it ensures you absorb all the electrolytes you need. And get this, it has 3 times the electrolytes and 4 times less sugar than those leading brands. Plus, it's developed using the World Health Organization's standards for oral rehydration solutions, making it the equivalent of a bag of IV fluids. Best of all, there are no artificial dyes or sweeteners. It's so perfect for the entire family. You can drink it any time of day, before, during, or after workouts or sports. So say goodbye to sugary juices and hello to superior hydration with Corvives Hydrate in pink lemonade. Visit corvive.com. That's CORVIVE.com. And use promo code Kirsten, that's KIRSTEN, for 30% off your order. Try it today and feel the difference.
So I love this episode because talking to athletes like yourself, Matt, who are just moments away from having had their college experience, and then now she is coaching, I think it's always fun to hear about the different avenues people take and how they get there. And Juliana surely was an exceptional athlete who had a very interesting path, and the fact that she was a multi-sport athlete and ended up pivoting in college and continuing on and doing track and field was, I thought, really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't hear many athletes go in for one sport and then completely change it to a sport that they hadn't even tried. She hadn't even tried before. She's doing it at the Division I level. So yeah. I think that the skill, the confidence, the ability to be able to do that is really impressive out of Juliana.
And speaking of growth mindset, somebody who's willing to take a swing and just, I'm willing to see where it goes without having her ego get in the way of, expectations around, she clearly was a very good basketball player and good athlete. So to be able to let go of expectations and just say, I'm going to try this and see how it goes.
Yeah. And with with your coaching, how does that line of being able to pivot and being able to change direct to the real world?
I think that's a motto for life. And I think the more adaptive we can become to looking at everything as an experiment versus things needing to go a certain way and needing to have an end result, rather just, hey, let's try this. Let's set a big target and start working towards it, but without feeling like, if this doesn't go exactly the way I'm hoping, that it's the end all be all.
Yeah. Do you see a lot of athletes around, who struggle with that, who struggle to pivot, or do you find that athletes have a better skill set to be able to do it?
That would be a really interesting study. I hear anecdotally, I think as an athlete or anything, if you become an expert at anything, whether it's music or arts or whatever, your identity gets really wrapped up in it. And so I do hear, and I know I experienced myself once I left college, for the first time I wasn't being recruited. That was a hard, looking in the mirror and okay, who am I now that I'm not a college athlete? Did you experience that? Or, you're only a year and a half out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm only 7 months out at this point, and and it was something that I was heavily prepared for. I saw a lot of guys who left my team, went into the real world, and they struggled with it. They struggled with the identity thing of who am I? I've been a soccer player my whole life. And it's definitely been a constant struggle for myself, figuring out who you are. I know I'm no longer Matt the soccer player, and I know I really tried hard to not just be singularly that and see myself as that. An all-encompassing human being who has so many different aspects to them, and playing soccer was one of them, but the skills I learned from it were really the things that made me the person I am. But with that being said, as much as you tell yourself that, as much as you know that in your heart of hearts, it's, I still remember walking out to training and having my slides on and people walking around and seeing me and knowing that, when people asked, who is he? I was a soccer player. And now people don't care about that. They don't care about who I was in college and defining me as a soccer player, because that's not who I am anymore. So I think the ability to, as much as you tell yourself it, you don't even see it in everyday life until you leave it, and then you start to define yourself as something else. And it comes with a lack of structure that, when you lose that structure and you lose that stability, you lose, a piece of yourself, and you got to find who you are and where that gap gets filled.
What do you think you miss most about being a college athlete and being a soccer player?
I think definitely the relationships, like the locker room, the being around to get, your teammates all the time, becoming a bit of a family, and knowing that those relationships can be tested, and knowing that, you have a group of people who are just excited to see you every day. I think one thing that college, especially going to a smaller college where you see kind of the same faces every day, and then as well as being part of a soccer team, you definitely see the same faces every day. You don't have to think about being social ever. You don't ever have to think about when the next time you're going to see your friends is, what's the plan, when to organize. You just see them. It's just part of your everyday life. And as a pretty social person myself, I struggled with that walking out of college of I have to, put myself out there and be ready to see people. I don't just bump into them walking out of my dorm or walking out of my house. And I would definitely say the thing I miss most about it is just knowing, that I'm going to see some of my best friends every day. And every time I walk into the locker room, I was really excited to see who was in there at that time. Because some days you get ready an hour before training, and some days you're running from class, you got 10 minutes to get ready for training. And even whether it's 10 minutes or an hour, I was always going to have a joke with somebody in the locker room. And I was always going to have a laugh, and I was always going to have a smile to see them. So I definitely miss that. And then, and that's all that comes before the playing. So,
yeah. I think bringing it back to Juliana too, I love how Jules pivoted and is still has it in her life while she's getting an advanced degree by coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And now she's become the expert. So being able to teach and help those behind you, which I think is the best way to share a gift, right? When we teach something to somebody else, then we really truly learn it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. She showed a lot of ability in her in not only pivoting but also to learn a new skill and become an expert at it. She's a coach now. I mean, how long she was in track and field for a total of like 4, maybe 5 years, and now she's coaching it at George Mason, and while getting a PhD after getting a master's degree. Her seek of knowledge is something that I was really impressed by.
Yes. And that's when I met her at the March Madness, sat next to her and got to cheer her brother and my son on at the same time. And that's what made me say, gosh, I really want to have you on, because she clearly was a curious person and a lifelong learner. And that is what I think being a great at anything is about, is just being, looking for new ways to try and do things, and you'll incorporate that into whatever you do. So.
Yeah, no, she was hugely impressive, and it was also exciting to see it was cool to see how excited she was to cheer on her brother, and to see him go to the dance. And she even said he had been to the NCAA tournament every year he'd been there, and that was the first year that she got to experience going and watching him. And what an awesome fate that she got to sit next to you as well, and ended up coming on the podcast.
Yeah, so fun. We loved it. All right. Like, share, follow, spread the word. We're loving doing these. These are so much fun.
Yeah.